Seems we're actually going to be reading about reading Thoreau. We're reading Thoreau. We're reading Thoreau's section on reading. See what he says about whether we should read or what we should read in the section on where I lived and what I lived for and what I read. In the section on economy. Do you think that reading is part of economy? Is it economical to read? It's economical to read. Well, this is a library book, so the library. So it was economical. This is from Walden. With a little more deliberation in the choice of their pursuits, all men would perhaps become essentially students and observers, for certainly their nature and destiny are interesting to all alike. In accumulating property for ourselves or our posterity, in founding a family or a state, or acquiring fame even, we are mortal, but in dealing with truth we are immortal. He's saying our learning, spiritual learning over time is immortal. Do you think it is? I thought you forgot everything it said. I suppose so some carryover. Acquiring fame even. We are mortal, but in dealing with truth we are immortal, and need fear no change nor accident. So if you pursue the truth, that aspect is immortal. The oldest Egyptian or Hindu philosopher raised a corner of the veil from the statue of the divinity, and still the trembling robe remains raised, and I gaze upon as fresh a glory as he did, since it was I in him that was then so bold, and it is he in me that now reviews the vision. No dust has settled on that robe, no time has elapsed since that divinity was revealed. That time which we really improve, or which is improvable, is neither past, present, nor future. My residence was more favorable, not only to thought, but to serious reading than a university, and though I was beyond the range of the ordinary circulating library, I had more than ever come upon within the influence of those books which circulate around the world, whose sentences were first written on bark and are now merely copied from time to time onto linen paper. So he spent some of his time at Walden reading. I think he borrowed books from Emerson. Or he had some books. He used to go to the library in Boston. Read. Says the poet Mir Camar Uddin Mast. Who is he? Interesting. Mir sounds Arabic. Being seated to run through the region of the spiritual world, I have had this advantage in books. To be intoxicated by a single glass of wine, I have experienced this pleasure when I have drunk the liquor of the esoteric doctrines. I kept Homer's Iliad on my table through the summer, though I looked at his page only once, and then incessant labor with my hands at first, for I had my house to finish, and my beans to hoe at the same time, made Morse study impossible. farmer doesn't have much time to read, unless he's a simple farmer. Yet I sustained myself by the prospect of such reading in future. I read one or two shallow books of travel in the intervals of my work, till that employment made me ashamed of myself. And I asked where it was then that I lived. You should be ashamed to read travel books. The student may read Homer or Aeschylus in Greek without danger of dissipation. But we're allowed to read Homer and Aeschylus.
He wants to travel. He doesn't want to read about travel.
Dear, he says we're allowed to read Aeschylus. Or luxuriousness, for it implies that he, in some measure, emulate the heroes and consecrate morning hours to the pages. The heroic books, even if printed in the character of our mother tongue, will always be in a language dead to degenerate times, and we must laboriously seek the meaning of each word and line, conjecturing a larger sense than common use permits out of what wisdom and valor and generosity we have. The modern, cheap, and fertile press, with all its translations, has done little to bring us near to the heroic writers of antiquity. I guess we're supposed to study classics. Don't you want your Waldenian house near a major classics library? Could be
All
out.
the classics are everywhere now.
Oh, now they are. Yeah, you can get the Penguin classics. Yeah, you can get the classics pretty easily. It was pretty hard back then. How many books did Thomas Jefferson own? That's crazy a number. They seem as solitary, and the letter in which they are printed are rare and curious as ever. It is worth the expense of youthful days and costly hours if you learn only some words of an ancient language. It's worthwhile to learn ancient Greek, which are raised out of the trivialness of the street to be perpetual suggestions and provocations. It is not in vain that the farmer remembers and repeats the few Latin words which he has heard. Men sometimes speak as if the study of the classics would at length make way for more modern and practical studies, but the adventurous student will always study classics, in whatever language they may be written and however ancient they may be. You have to read them to be adventurous. For what are the classics but the noblest recorded thoughts of men? They are the only oracles which are not decayed, and there are such answers to the most modern inquiry in them as Delphi and Dodona never gave. Who's Dodona?
Another, it's
Huh? Another oracle? Dodona. That's two things I didn't know. I didn't know Mir, Camar, Uddin, Mast. I didn't know Dodona. Is that a place in Greece? We might as well omit to study nature because she is old. Nature is old too. To read well, that is, to read true books in a true spirit, is a noble exercise, and one that would test the reader more than any exercise which the customs of the day esteem. Is our reading of Walden a noble exercise? You feel ennobled in any way. But why bother to read it out loud?
So I can hear you.
So you can hear it. Oh, I'm reading so you can hear it. So, so I can read it and you can hear it. So basically, you don't have to read it. We could read it together. And what was the first English book you ever read? I like segues. I don't like it. I don't. This is not LibriVox or audiobooks. Well, this is more of a noble exercise. It requires a training such as the athletes underwent, and the steady intention almost of the whole life to this object. Books must be read as deliberately and reservedly as they were written. It is not enough even to be able to speak the language of that nation by which they are written, for there is a memorable interval between the spoken and the written language, the language heard and the language read. One is a common transitory, a sound, a tongue, a dialect merely, almost brutish, and we learn it unconsciously like the brutes of our mothers. The other is the maturity and experience of that. If that is our mother tongue, this is our father tongue, of reserved and select expression, too significant to be heard by the ear, which we must be born again in order to speak. The crowds of men who merely spoke the Greek and Latin tongues in the Middle Ages were not entitled by the accident of birth to read the works of genius written in those languages, for these were not written in that Greek or Latin which they knew, but in the select language of literature. They had not learned the nobler dialects of Greece and Rome, but the very materials on which they were written were waste paper to them, and they prized instead of cheap contemporary literature. But when the several nations of Europe had acquired distinct though rude written languages of their own, sufficient for the purposes of their rising literatures, then first learning revived, and scholars were enabled to discern from that remoteness the treasures of antiquity. What the Roman and Grecian multitude could not hear, after the lapse of ages, a few scholars read, and a few scholars only are still reading it. Are there some still reading ancient Greek? And don't forget Latin. However much we may admire the orator's occasional burst of eloquence, the noblest written words are commonly as far behind or above the fleeting spoken language as the firmament with its stars is behind the clouds. There are the stars, and they who can may read them. The astronomers forever comment on and observe them. They are not exhalations like our daily colloquies and various vaporous breath. What is called eloquence in the forum is commonly found to be rhetoric in the study. Does he preach too much? Is he preaching scholasticism?
No.
He's not. Why didn't he just go to Harvard and become a professor like the rest of them? Seems he went to the woods. The orator yields to the inspiration of a transient occasion, and speaks to the mob before him, to those who can hear him, but the writer, whose more equitable life is his occasion, and who would be distracted by the event and the crowd, would inspire the orator. speaks to the intellect and heart of mankind, to all in any age who can understand him. No wonder that Alexander carried the Iliad with him on his expeditions in a precious casket. A written word is the choicest of relics. It is something at once more intimate with us and more universal than any other work of art. Better than a work of art? No, it's not better than Beethoven's Ninth, is it?
It's written also.
What about... It is the work of art nearest to life itself. It may be translated into every language and not only be read but actually breathed from all human lips, not be represented on canvas or in marble only, but be carved out of the breath of life itself. The symbol of an ancient man's thought becomes a modern man's speech. 2,000 summers have imparted to the monuments of Grecian literature as to her marbles only a maturer golden and autumnal tint. Is that like the leaves? An autumnal tint. For they have carried their own serene and celestial atmosphere into all lands to protect them against the corrosion of time.
How do you spell that? Autumnal?
Autumnal. Just autumnal. Autumnal. He says the leaves teach us how to die. Do you think leaves teach you how to die? Books are the treasured wealth of the world and the fit inheritance of generations and nations. Books, the oldest and the best, and naturally and rightfully on the shelves of every cottage. Books were really treasured back then. That's because they're hard to get and expensive. Books were expensive too. Do you think if books back then were very expensive, we should treasure them more now when they're not expensive? They're not that expensive now. So now books are cheap and time is value. Time to read them is valuable. But the book itself is cheap. Well, we could buy time to read them. They have no cause of their own to plead, but while they enlighten and sustain the reader, his common sense will not refuse them. Their authors are a natural and irresistible aristocracy in every society, and more than kings or emperors exert an influence on mankind. Do you feel the Quran and the Bible influenced mankind at all? When the illiterate and perhaps scornful trader has earned by enterprise and industry his coveted leisure and independence and is admitted to the circles of wealth and fashion, he turns inevitably at last to those still higher but yet inaccessible circles of intellect and genius, and is sensible only of the imperfections of his culture and the vanity and insufficiency of all his riches, and further proves his good sense by the pains which he takes to secure for his children that intellectual culture whose want he so keenly feels. Thus it is that he becomes the founder of a family and reads 50 books a year like Bill Gates. Do you think when you get rich you just have to and then read books? You could just retire and read books. And
If
then
you
you
like to read, you find time.
read books. There's so many other things to do, but I guess you end up just reading books. Those who have not learned to read the ancient classics in the language in which they were written must have a very imperfect knowledge of the history of the human race, for it is remarkable that no transcript of them has ever been made into any modern tongue, unless our civilization itself may be regarded as such a transcript.
Interesting. I'm glad I did ancient Greek.
Our current civilization is just a book, you think? We're all just a footnote to Homer.
Let's make coffee.
Why don't you make coffee?
Can you wait and read the rest after?
Not really. But you can re-listen to it.
Well, that's not as clear.
Then I could read Taylor in between.
Okay, read something that you want, but not that. I like to listen that.
Want me to read Taylor in the middle of it? Or the
Okay.
journals. I could stop and read Thoreau's journal in the middle of it. While she makes coffee. This is all for the convenience of her and not for the rest of the world. Convenience. My actual religion is just of convenience. Her convenience. This is the best of the journals of Thoreau, which is like to the erudite man of extensive erudition and the true erudite polymath or pundit. It's the real Walden. There's 7,000 pages of his journal. There's a professional grade, Walden. You're a professional. October 22nd, 1837. What are you doing now, he asked. Do you keep a journal? So I made my first entry today. That's a famous opening phrase there. What happened was when he met Emerson, Emerson said, do you keep a journal? What are you doing now? He asked. Do you keep a journal? And Thoreau, from that day on, so I made my first entry, started journaling, which was perhaps the basis of writing itself. He accumulated his material. Solitude. To be alone, I find it necessary to escape the present. I avoid myself. How could I be alone in the Roman Emperor's chamber of mirrors? I seek a garret. The spiders must not be disturbed, nor the floor swept, nor the lumber arranged. The Fog, October 27th, 1837. The prospect is limited to Knobscot, and the Nurscumnock the trees stand with boughs downcast like pilgrims beaten by a storm, and the whole atmosphere landscape wears a sombre aspect. So when thick vapors cloud the soul, it strives in vain to escape from its humble working-day valley and pierce the dense fog, which shuts out from view the blue peaks in its horizon, but must be content to scan it near and homely hills. October 29th, the ducks at Goose Pond, 2 ducks of the summer or wood species, which were merrily dabbling in their favorite basin, struck up a retreat on my approach and seemed disposed to take French leave, paddling off with swan-like majesty. They are first-rate swimmers, beating me at a round pace, and what was to me a new trait in the duck character, dove every minute or two and swam several feet under water in order to escape our attention. Just before immersion, they seemed to give each other a significant nod. Then, as if by a common understanding, 'twas heels up and head down in the shaking of a duck's wing. When they reappeared, it was amusing to observe with what a self-satisfied "Darn it, how he nicks 'em" ere they paddled off to repeat the experiment. There's something about the arrowhead, which is most of these are significant entries. A curious incident happened some 4 or 6 weeks ago, which I think it worth the while to record. John Thoreau's brother and I had been searching for Indian relics and been successful enough to find 2 arrowheads and a pestle when of a Saturday evening, with our heads full of the past and its remains, we strolled to the mouth of Swamp Bridge Brook, and as we neared the brow of the hill forming the bank of the river, inspired by my theme, I broke forth into an extravagant eulogy on those savage times, using most violent gesticulations by way of this illustration. There on Nausatuck and I was their lodge and the rendezvous of the tribe, and yonder on Clamshell here their feasting ground. This was, no doubt, a favorite haunt. Here on this brow was an eligible lookout post, but how often have they stood on this very spot at this very hour, when the sun was sinking behind yonder woods and gilding with their last rays the waters of the Muscat Aquad, and pondered the day's success and the morrow's prospects, and communed with the spirit. Oh, their fathers, gone before them to the land of shades. Here, I exclaimed, stood Tahatawan, and there, to complete the period, is Tawatahan's arrowhead. He instantly proceeded to sit down on the spot I had pointed to, and I to carry out the joke, to lay bare an ordinary stone, which my whim had selected, but lo, the first I laid hands on, the grubbing stone that was to be, proved a most perfect arrowhead, as sharp as if just from the hands of the Indian fabricator. That magical arrowhead. We read a little bit from the journal. We're reading the extremely long Walden. The complete journals, not really, the best of the complete journals of Henry David Thoreau. Sunrise, October 30th. First we have the grey twilight of the poets, with dark and berry clouds diverging to the zenith. Then glows the intruding cloud in the east, as it bore a precious jewel in its bosom, a deep brown gulf of golden grey indenting its upper edge, while slender rules of fleecy vapor irradiating from the common center like white-armed troops fall regularly into their places. Sailing with and against the stream, November 3rd. If one would reflect, let him embark on some placid stream, and float with the current. He cannot resist the muse, as we ascend the stream, and plying the paddle with might and main, snatched in impetuous thoughts course through the brain. We dream of conflict, power, and grandeur, but turn the prow downstream, and rock tree kin, all assuming new and varying positions as wind and water shift the seam. Vapor, the liquid lapse of thought, far-reaching and sublime, but ever calm and gently undulating. Truth, November 5th, truth strikes us from behind, and in the dark as well as from before, and in broad daylight. Reading 1837. Now the king of day plays at peep, bo peep round the world's corners, and every cottage window smiles a golden smile, a very picture of glee. I see the water glistening in the eye, the smothered breathings of an awaking day strike the ear with an undulating motion over hill and dale, pasture and woodland. Come they to me, and I am at home in the world. November 17th, sunrise. Ice harp, December 5th. My friend tells me he has discovered a new note in nature which he calls the ice harp. Chancing to throw a handful of pebbles into the pond where there was an air chamber under the ice, it discoursed a pleasant music to him. Herein resides a tenth muse, and as he was the man to discover it, probably the extra melody is in him. Facts, December 16th. How indispensable is a current study of nature, is a perception of her true meaning. The fact will one day flower out into truth. The season will mature and fructify what the understanding had cultivated. Mere accumulators of fact, collectors of materials for the master. Workmen are like those plants growing in dark forests, but which put forth only leaves instead of blossoms. Crystals, December 23. Across the river today on the ice. Through the weather is raw and wintry, and the ground covered with snow, I noticed a solitary robin who looked as if he needed to have his services to the babes in the woods to speedily requited. In the side of the high bank by the leaning hemlocks there were some curious crystallizations. Whatever the water or other causes had formed a hole in the bank, its throat and outer edge, like the entrance to a citadel of the olden time, bristled with the glistening iron armor. In one place you might see minute ostrich feathers, which seemed the waving plumes of the warriors filing into the fortress. In another, the glancing fan-shaped banners of the Lilliputian host, and in another, the needle-shaped particles collected into bundles resembling the plumes of the pine might pass for a phalanx of spears. The whole hill was like an immense quartz rock with minute crystals sparkling within innumerable crannies. I tried to fancy that there was a disposition in these crystallizations to take the forms of the contiguous foliage. We finished reading the 1837 selected journals. Selected. We selected ourselves. Those who have not learned to read the ancient classics in the language in which they were written must have a very imperfect knowledge of the history of the human race, for it is remarkable that no transcript of them has ever been made into any modern tongue, unless our civilization itself may be regarded as such a transcript. Dear. I wonder how you pause it and restart it. I'm going to stop reading there. Continue again.